Hey, what's going on, everybody? BDF44 here, saying hello to you. And the video I wanted to make today is just to talk about how raw it can be sometimes out here. Um, Two situations that are going on. I've covered Boogie Cousins on a couple of occasions, just talking about how I wanted him to get a job, and of course, excuse me, I also wanted him to recover from his injuries and all of that. Recently, he got married. Congratulations to him and his family on that one. Unfortunately, it had some bad news attached to it. His TMZ reported that his child's mother released some audio of him, and I heard it, and it was not pleasant. Obviously, you can't fully confirm that it's him, but I think I know his voice based on what I've heard. It sounded like him very much. And basically, what he was saying was, he wanted his wanted her to allow his child to go to his wedding, and she wasn't having it. So he said, "I'm about to take it to another level if you don't let that happen." And then he proceeded to tell her he was gonna put a bullet in her head, for not allowing his child to go there. So that was recorded, and it gets raw out here, man. I've been blessed enough to have avoided being in circumstances like that, so I have no experience with baby mama stuff, as people call it, or being in those type of situations. I have not experienced that, but I have watched others go through that from afar, and I know that it can be very, very tough when you're trying to amicably raise a child with someone that you're not together with, and sometimes things will be attached to that won't have anything to do with the child's betterment, but more so about being spiteful, and being vindictive based on maybe how you felt you were treated, your feelings being hurt, or the relationship not going the way you wanted it to, or just not receiving what you want from your child's father or child's mother. It can get really, really bad. People say things to one another. I think the problem with this situation, obviously outside of the sheer threats, is the fact that she recorded him knowing that he would say something incriminating, meaning that he spoke to her like this a lot. Now, on one hand, you could say where he never followed through with those threats, if you were to assume that he made those threats very often. The other hand is, when someone says stuff like this, you can't play around like that. We've heard of threats and then people going through with them. We've heard of people building up over time with their threats and then finally going through with them. So one half of me looks at her and says, wow, this is, you're really ruining this man by doing this. And the other half says, you probably did the right thing if you take his threats seriously, and if he's been talking to her like this for a long period of time, that's something that she would be obligated to address for her child's safety and for her own safety. So that's just what it is. It's a slippery slope, because I've seen vindictive baby mamas, I've seen vindictive baby fathers in my life, just watching other people's lives, paying attention to stuff. And sometimes circumstances can be very, very, very convenient. You can take a person's weakness, know what buttons to press, and then use it against them to get what you want. And it does feel like this is what's going on here, in my opinion. And I know that that's an outside looking in. I don't know these people, whatever, but I just get a bad vibe from the entire situation. Now, again, threats like this should be taken seriously. If you've got people in your life making threats like this against you, it's not for you to listen to my opinion and then judge whether or not you should take your safety into account. Absolutely not. I think she should have reported this, and you should report whatever or address it in your life, but as safely as possible. However, when the baby's involved in a situation like this, he's getting married, the lady saying she don't want him to have his child there, you can definitely understand DeMarcus's frustration. You can understand why he would want his child there. But if he's threatening her and all of that, you can understand maybe why she wouldn't want her child to go anywhere near the wedding. So it's a lot to take into account. I pray for both of these folks. I pray for the child involved, and I hope that the laws in this situation, I hope that the law in this situation can be just, fair, and make sure that the safety of everyone involved is taken into account. I take into account what I think my understanding of what Boogie's going through right now, having these injuries and all of that, is just one aspect of what he's going through. Does that give me a pass to allow him to say that kind of stuff? No. If he said that kind of stuff to someone in my family, I would take it seriously, and I would not set aside what he's going through as a means of me looking at it a certain way. That's not something you can do whether you're thriving in life or whether you're having a tough time. That's your, at the end of the day, we gotta respect our kids' moms as as men. We gotta at least give them the fact that they did what they did to assure that your child is here, and that they also are the child's mother. You hurt her, you hurt your child. Whether you mean to or not. That child grows up without a mom or a father because of decisions that you make in this situation. So try to take that into account if you're raging over your baby mama or your baby fathers out there. Remember that your kid's heart is involved. Your kid's life and future is what is going to ultimately pay the cost for the decisions that you make. And keep that in mind when you anger your baby mama and baby father as well. Remember, the consequences of what they've done is created by the circumstances in which you put them in. What the situations in which they're reacting to could be avoided by decisions that you make. So we have to be very, very accountable for the decisions that we make as adults when we're in relationships and when we have children. That's one raw situation I want to talk about. The other raw situation that I wanted to talk about was the Paul Mooney situation. So, for me, and I'm just going to speak right here, right now, clearly, so you can hear me, I never thought Paul Mooney was heterosexual. I did not. When I first got my experience with Paul Mooney on the Dave Chappelle show, as a lot of us have in this generation. I had heard of him before, and I knew that his comedy was geared toward, it was a lot of racial chip on your shoulder type of jokes that he would make. It wouldn't be minor at all. He comes straight at white folks' heads consistently, and he's been continuing that, and he's been sharp in doing so all the way up until recently, when it's been released that, or been reported rather, that he has some sort of mental depreciation situation going on, whether it be dementia or something like that. He may be facing something like that right now if the reports are true. And then this news comes out at that same time. It's all fishy to me. It's fishy in a sense that, first of all, you have to take threats like this seriously. Again, I say the word threats, but that's not what I mean. I mean circumstances like this, when they're being reported this way, when someone has been reported to have molested a child, obviously it's not something to play with. I look at the circumstances surrounding the situation, and it gives me a great deal of things to put together. There are a lot of things to put together. Paul Mooney's health, the timing of this situation. Richard Pryor has been gone for a long time. The fact that the bodyguard of Richard Pryor is the one who's bringing this information out. Richard Pryor's son, who's the alleged person involved in this situation. The timeline in which these things have been reported in terms of what took place, it has not been consistent in the reports that I've heard. If the timeline is correct, they said that Richard Pryor Jr. was 25 years old when it was alleged that Paul Mooney slept with him. Then it was said that this took place before Richard Pryor Jr. was 21 years of age. Then when TMZ basically ran down on Richard Pryor Jr. and asked him about this, he insinuated that he was underage when whatever took place. He did not mention Paul Mooney's name, but it was very, very clear that he was responding to what was being reported. Reluctantly, he did not seem like he wanted to have this conversation, but he was not in the business of insinuating that he was not taken advantage of. So all of this looks bad, obviously, for Paul Mooney, especially if the man was a young man, was a child, excuse me. But on the other hand, you look at the aspect that was said in regards to Richard Pryor Sr.'s response to what took place. And what's being reported is that Richard Pryor Sr. told his bodyguard, via the bodyguard, out of the bodyguard's mouth, that he wanted Paul Mooney taken care of permanently. and he was willing to put $1 million on that. And that is really, really, really intense, obviously, but I'd be lying if I said I was surprised. And the reason why is because Paul Mooney and Richard Pryor are reported to have been very close friends. They obviously worked with one another on Richard Pryor's show, had a lot of, close knit groups between them and other friends. It was alleged that Richard Pryor, and I think he admitted this, that he had some engagements outside of heterosexual interactions. He had some engagements, and Paul Mooney, I think, like I said, I never thought he was heterosexual in the first place. I just didn't get that vibe from him through the screen, honestly. And I didn't think he was in a closet. So I guess the relationship between those two men was of an understanding that they both liked men. I think it was understood maybe between those two that his son may have been growing up gay. And it was like, you violated. Like, I could see where Richard Pryor, if all of this is true, I could see where Richard Pryor is like, man, you violated. You know what my son's growing up in. If I'm reading between the lines, Richard Pryor, he told the world that he was a troubled man going through a troubled life, living with a lot of money. And because of it, he had a drug problem that allowed him to cushion his pain, and he had friends that allowed him to enable himself in just about whatever way he wanted to, sexually or otherwise. He was a very, very, very famous, prominent, well-loved, well-liked man who really didn't have a whole lot of people saying no to him. But he needed a lot of help, and he never got it. He just got enabled a lot of the time. And I think it was understood that he was living in this world that his son was kind of feeding off of that, all of the things that was going on around him negatively. And for somebody like Paul Mooney, who I would imagine knew him well enough to understand this circumstance, for that person to take advantage of his son, or be perceived to have taken advantage of his son, underage, that's worse. But even if he's not underage, just knowing that he obviously, I would imagine Richard Pryor would want his friends to protect his son from certain types of things and entities, and being part of this Hollywood lifestyle. He would not want someone like Paul Mooney, who he considered his friend, to introduce his son to anything of that sort, let alone be the person that gave him that energy and brought him into that world. I just feel like at the end of the day, I don't know that I would want to kill someone, but what I take into account is that Richard Pryor had a lot of drugs in his system a lot of the time, and so whatever thoughts was in his head was being adjusted by the chemicals in his body. But even in a clear-minded state, which the bodyguard alleged Richard Pryor was in when he told him that he wanted, money to be, wanted to put money on Mooney's head, that he said the man was in perfect, thinking order. He said the man was clear-minded, even after he came back and asked him the second time. So, it's a lot to consider. It's a lot to take in. The news is really, really wild, and the timing of it just seems corrupted. And again, it just brings me back to what Paul Mooney was all about. Fighting the white dude. He got on stage and insulted white people and talked down to them, basically, and just spoke consistently insultingly toward white people. And I feel like this is kind of like a little get back. This is what this feels like to me. And I know he may be guilty of this, but I'm looking at how the year is going, and it's one black man after another. One unapologetic, getting away with everything black man after another that has some sick sexual desire that's being exposed for it, vilified for it, thrown in jail for it, and then you can kind of just sit back and wait for the next name. It seems like Paul Mooney's the next name. We've had R. Kelly, we've had Michael Jackson, we've had, who am I missing? Bill Cosby. Like, they're getting the sicko black folks out of here, especially if they're the type to stick their chests out and say, I'm going to do what I want to do. Which all three of those guys have been. All four of them, actually. So, I don't know that I don't personally believe Michael Jackson was guilty of any of that. Bill Cosby, on the other hand, has been convicted. R. Kelly, I do think, was guilty. I think that man's very ill. And Paul Mooney, I don't really know enough about this story other than to say if the reports are true that he's gay, it would be no surprise to me. But pedophilia is an entirely different thing. It's to be taken an entirely different way, and it should be taken very seriously if those reports are true, which, of course, Richard Pryor Jr. is insinuating, or seems to be insinuating to me and to many others. So this is a very serious situation. Both of these situations are obviously very serious. I'm praying for everybody involved. I want the best for all the victims involved, so that they can move forward, whoever they may be. Sometimes the victims doesn't always appear to be the ones that we think it is. Whoever it may be, the people who are being taken advantage of and being treated poorly, I'm hopeful that things will be straightened out for them. And yeah, man, just I'm gonna do my best to keep my house in order, and I hope that all of us can learn from these circumstances, especially people of color, especially prominent people of color, and understand that we are not immune to falling. You got to keep your house in order. Get help for your sicknesses. Discipline yourself. See the fruit in that. Whatever you got to do to assure that you don't give ammunition to your enemy, you need to assure that you do that. And discipline is where it starts, I believe. Taking care of yourself is where it starts, I believe. Positive reinforcement, all that good stuff is what I believe. But most importantly, not taking advantage of your neighbor. Treating people reasonably as possible. Being respectful of people's space. Being respectful of people's age. Being respectful of people's desires to not be involved in certain stuff. You are not the center of the world, but your world can fall if you think you are. And that's what I've learned from this. So, with that being said, everybody take care, and God bless, and that's it. EDF.